All right, we've hit that magic number of 50 participants, so I'm gonna call it a go. And good morning, Housing California. Both those of you who are in Sacramento, it was nice to see quite a few of you last night, both at the conference center and even the after hours events. And also welcome to those of you who are coming to us from afar, both virtually. So this is kind of an interesting new format. We have people all over the state who are tuning into the Housing California conference today. So I'm Mark Stivers with the California Housing Partnership. And I think we have what we know is today one of the most popular always of session panels. This is about TCAC and CDLAC and both where we are today and where we think they're going to go. And I also note that these sessions have only gotten more popular, both with all the activity at TCAC and CDLAC last year's and with Nancy Robles's session to the position of executive director. So with Nancy in here, we have more interest than ever. So I'm going to quickly introduce our panelists, and then we're just going to sort of jump right into things. Obviously, we have with us Nancy Robles, who's both the executive director of the Tax Credit Allocation Committee and the interim executive director of the Debt Limit Allocation Committee. So really, she is wearing two hats, and it's sort of part of the treasurer's effort to really consolidate and streamline and align the missions of both TCAC and CDLAC, since so much of the work that they do overlaps. So we are very pleased to have Nancy, and with her we have Anthony Zito, who's a deputy director at TCAC. And Anthony, has not only in-depth knowledge of the tax credit and bond process, I might add, but he also has a lot of historical memory. So Anthony, you've been at TCAC now for, as I would say, 13 years. Is that about right?
June 1st will be 18 years, actually.
18 years. Oh man, I'm way short. I'm not giving you credit. Well, when you look 35, I couldn't go much higher than that. So, all right. And then we have with us also, we're also going to talk about not just about where we are at TCAC and CDLAC and where we plan to go, but we're going to really check in with the development community. We have two representatives from the nonprofit affordable housing development community. We have Don Gilmore, who's the executive director of the Community Housing Development Corporation based out of Richmond, California. And we have Suni Lei Chang, who's president and chief operating officer of Link Housing based in Long Beach, but both of them who work outside of their base cities. And I think what we're looking for from them a little bit today is, so how are the changes at TCAC and CDLAC sort of affecting their decisions as developers, or where they develop, how they apply for funds, and then also things that they may want to see in future changes as we continue to always perfect and improve these programs. So with that, that's just sort of a brief intro. I'm going to turn it over to Nancy here, and who has a number of slides again to talk about where we are and where we're going at TCAC and CDLAC. Thank you, Nancy.
Great, thank you. Before I share my screen, I just want to say hi, everyone. It's great to be here. Nancy Robles, Executive Director of CDLAC and TCAC. And I've officially been here for a little over a year. And prior to that, was working, I worked for the treasurer in several different capacities in the past, and also at the governor's office at the California Infrastructure Bank. Prior to that, I was in the private sector banking industry. It's great to be here. I tell you, I've learned a lot over the last year, and it's been, an absolute pleasure being here and being able to speak to you today about what's going on with the tax credits and the debt allocation. I prepared my slide presentation and talked a lot about the numbers that we did last year, but neglected to put some slides in there about what's going on this year. And because it's just been so public and I feel like everybody knows about it, but just to start that off, we received a little bit less this year in debt allocation than we did the prior year, only because our population went down a bit. The factor that's used to calculate our debt allocation is it's a factor given by IRS, which did not change from last year to this year. However, our population went down, so it's just a tiny bit less, but it's still $4.3 billion that we have to allocate toward affordable housing and exempt facilities. The committee's already made the decision that the allocation to affordable housing, once again, is the priority, and exempt facilities got a small amount of that, because after all, we've got to have someone picking up the garbage for our affordable housing complexes, right? So, in addition, the other change that's happening this year is we only have 2 rounds of applications for bonds. Now, that decision was made because the first round is taking place with the old regulations, and the second round will take place with a new set of regulations. You know, we learned over the last year and a half or so that the regulations needed to be adjusted. And in order to do that in, you know, a proper fashion, we needed enough stakeholder feedback, we needed public comment, and, you know, we needed to give it, you know, a really good thought process and take everything into consideration. So it is taking a little bit of time, but the goal of that taking time is that we're going to get it right. And once the regulations are in place, hopefully they will stay sustainable for as long as our bond allocation is competitive. So I'll go ahead and get into our slide presentation. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And all right, do I have a good screen up?
It looks great. Go for it.
All right, fantastic. So I did have a couple of announcements to make. We do have some new staff here. In an effort to, you know, join CDLAC and TCAC and make us a more cohesive agency, what we've done is, you know, Anthony is our long-term trusted deputy, and that has not changed. However, we've added some assistants to the deputy staff as well. So Ricky Hammett is our new deputy director, and she is the director over CDLAC and also the TCAC development side. And Ricky comes to us from HCD. And, you know, so far, I think she's been here a whole 90 days. And so far she's, you know, doing a fantastic job. Great on the learning curve, helping us a lot with some of the legislation that's out there right now. And Emily Burgos has been at CDLAC for a little over a year. Emily is the section chief there. And then we also have another new section chief in TCAC, and that's Gabrielle Stevenson. And, you know, at this point, we feel like our executive team is complete. We are working great together, and all of these folks are extremely accessible to you, including myself and Anthony. Just wanted to make sure I introduced that new staff.
And I know we have Ricky in the audience. I saw her there. So she's
excellent.
Here with us today.
Well, then I'm glad I said nice things. All right. So in 2021, we had a little over 4.3 billion in volume cap. And with that amount, we were able to help developers produce almost 23,000 units of affordable housing. And then 600,000 went to the exempt facilities. So since 1986, we've helped produce more than 500,000 affordable housing units with tax credits. And in 2021, 550 million went out in federal tax credits and 600 million in state tax credits. We also had disaster credits. We were allotted 80 million in 9% disaster credits. And here's a little chart of where the funding went for those disaster credits. We didn't use the entire 80 million. It was about 79. We got really close. And this, you know, Paradise Community Village, I know that this probably speaks deeply to those of us in California who experienced you know, the Paradise fires. It was one of the, you know, most disastrous wildfires in California. And Paradise Community Village was one of the projects that was assisted with TCAC credits. And that entire community completely burned to the ground. And they rebuilt that community in the exact same place. And we were super excited to be a part of their grand opening ceremony last year. So the California goals and the committee goals are pretty well aligned. In California, you know, our goal is 3.5 million units by 2025. And I listened to Gustavo Velasquez yesterday discuss that his figure is more like 2.5, which is what he believes is achievable and attainable. And you know, our goal for the committee as well as California is to help everyone reach that goal. You know, we also are interested in reducing the costs of development. And I will hear from Anthony a little bit later when we talk about more in detail about our regulation. That to do that, we're going to be changing our tiebreaker, which will increase public benefit and maximize our scarce resources that we have. Our committee goal, you know, even though regulations are changing, we're still committed to building the affordable housing that helps the homeless, you know, veterans, disabled, and the extremely low and very low income, and also new construction. So on our 4% application side, this is just to illustrate how oversubscribed we are and how competitive it is. We received 354 applications and we're able to award 164 of those. That assisted us with 16,500 low-income units, most of which were new construction. And then on the 9% side, 63,000, a little over that for the total units that were developed due to the 9% tax credits. On the 9% side, also oversubscribed, 182 applications and 106 awards.
And Nancy, can I just note for the record that 20,000 units of new construction and 22,000 overall units is probably by far a record of what California has ever produced through the TCAC program. So
yes, even
well
in this
done.
competitive stage, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. And on our disaster credit side, we had 65 applications and 39 awards for a little over 79 million. And then on the bond side, out of the 4.3 billion that we had for bond allocation, 3.7, a little over, went to affordable housing, and 600 million for exempt facilities. So we had allowed for 600 million in exempt facilities. However, we took 200 million and transferred it over to the affordable housing side. So everyone knows we've had challenges, and you know, the biggest challenge I think is the oversubscription. So we have a high demand and a limited amount of resources for that demand. In addition, you know, COVID hit and continued and continues, and we recognize that. So we've had a lot of extension requests, and when we can, we have been offering extensions. But, you know, COVID has affected, you know, the housing you know, development in all sorts of different ways. And it's related to, you know, a lot of it's related to staffing and permitting. And then also we've had supplemental requests to the bonds because of increased supplies. I'm sorry, increased prices and supply shortages. And then, of course, the disasters, because COVID wasn't enough. We had, you know, we had more wildfires this year. So, you know, looking forward, you know, we were really hoping that that infrastructure bill would help with the 50% test and reduce it to 25%, which, you know, we haven't lost all hope yet, for sure. But you know, it's not completely off the table. The likelihood, not gonna lie, it doesn't look good. But we're, you know, we're still pushing and we're still advocating for that. If we could get that 50% test reduced to 25%, we would certainly be able to do a lot more projects. And then recycle bonds. The recycle bond use is increasing. And, you know, I think that's a really valuable tool that we have to, you know, it basically just increases the amount of bond allocation that we have, and we can create more affordable housing if more were to use the recycle bond program. We do have an increased focus on public benefit. Our tiebreaker, you know, the committee did vote on the tiebreaker that we'll be recommending in our regulations. And that tiebreaker, you know, puts a great emphasis on public benefit like rent savings and high quality transit. And, you know, what we really need is more allocation for tax exempt bonds. How we get that is with that 50% test. I mean, it doesn't increase the amount, but it increases the numbers of projects that we'll be able to do. And then unification amongst our agencies. We're working closely with CalHFA and HCD, even CDLAC and TCAC working much more closely together. And, you know, just trying to coordinate and organize. And, you know, you know, my magic wand hope for the future is that we all are able to, you know, get into the same, you know, IT system where we can have one application for all, which isn't anything that's going to happen certainly this year, but it's something that we look at for the future. And then right now we are doing an in-depth review of our current regulations, which will be changing, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. And then we have a new program. Anthony's been working on this historic tax rehabilitation program most, so I'll let Anthony go through this slide.
Yes. So back in, I think it might have been even 2019, I think SB 451 allowed for us to, you know, allocate these state historic rehabilitation tax credits with the Office of Historic Preservation, and we've been working very closely with them. But due to the budgets, appropriations, I think it was started with COVID, the pandemic, it got pushed, and the credits could not be allocated until this year. So we are working through establishing regulations and as well as an application to take these projects that are historic. They have to go, we're working on the process as well as the regulations. And yeah, we're working very closely with the Office of Historic Preservation. They're the ones that work on the federal tax credits. And they've been really helpful in the process. So we hope to have that out, the regulations this month, along with the other changes. So
Anthony, just a quick question on that. Can those be paired with low income housing tax credits?
I don't believe there's any, I don't recall if there's a prohibition, but it's not specific to, you know, housing. It's other, you know, this is part of a economic, you know, to push the economic,
Yep.
You know,
Economic development efforts, but if it sounds like
yeah.
it sounds like if an affordable housing development were a historic structure, that they might want to take a look at that as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I actually had somebody approach me about using it on the tax credit deal. So yeah, and again, you know, we're working on drafting those regulations right now, so we'll have a little bit more information.
Right. Thanks, Anthony. Yeah, that is for all historic buildings. Mm-hmm.
And it's 50 million per year through 2026. And so obviously the way that the statute was written originally was 2021 was the first year. So I think obviously we're starting this year and hope to have that nailed down so we can start accepting applications.
Great, thank you. And then here's contact information for myself, Anthony, and Ricky. And okay, all right, and back to you, Mark. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. I know there's a lot of, thank you, Nancy. That's always very helpful. As we look ahead, you mentioned that the committee has voted on, the CDLAC committee has voted on a new tiebreaker. And I know we're expecting sort of proposed regulation changes coming forward. Can you first just talk about sort of the timing of the regulation changes and what people can expect for a public process and an adoption, and how that relates to the second round CDLAC application deadline? So I know people, as they put their applications together, will be very interested in knowing the rules as they go into the competition.
Certainly. So we've been working on these regulations for about a year. And you know, we've been working very closely with developers. We had a working group that the treasurer put together long before I even started here. And this working group was representative of profit and nonprofit developers throughout the state of California. They've been very helpful in, you know, being the eyes and ears of the developers and letting us know exactly what it is that is going to work to make affordable housing, you know, fair and representative of the entire state. So, you know, we've been, you know, very thankful for their assistance in this. As far as the timing at this point, we have a committee meeting coming up on April 27th. And now that I said April 27th, I do need to mention that that date might change. So watch for that. If you're on our listserv, we will send that information out on the listserv, but apparently the treasurer has a conflicting appointment. So we may move it the day ahead. So April 26th possibly, but today it's on the calendar for April 27th. And we plan to submit regulations, CDLAC regulations to the committee. And it will be based on some of the items that the committee's already voted on, which would be the tiebreaker and also other changes. What we're also trying to do is to, we noticed that there were some discrepancies between the CDLAC regulations and the TCAC regulations, and we're trying to, you know, meld those together so that we don't, you know, have any contradictions there, which we recognize we have right now. TCAC's regulations will be at the next committee meeting. We'll submit recommendations, but after the April 27th, so between April 27th and the end of May, we will have a probably a Zoom meeting to take public comments. So we'll have a workshop, a day-long workshop on that, so that we can get feedback from everyone on the regulations that we're recommending to the committee April 27th. Then after the workshop, and once we receive all of the written comment, we'll finalize those and take them for approval and get them filed. And the timing of that will be before the end of June.
Great. And then as a reminder, the application deadline for the CDLAC second round is in July at some point, correct?
Correct. Mm-hmm.
Great. So people won't have a ton of time between final adoption, but at least they can probably have some decent sense of direction when in late April, when the regulations are put out for public comment and whatnot.
Right. We don't expect the tiebreaker to change. I mean, we don't expect it to change from what we already have published on the website that the committee has already voted on.
Great. And
so that should be helpful. Yeah. And we do recognize, you know, that there's this huge timing issue and that developers need to, you know, be able to get their applications in order. And, you know, we are sympathetic with that and hope that you're sympathetic with the huge task that we have as well.
Absolutely. A lot on your plate. So just for the benefit of our audience here, many of whom some of whom were listening into the endless hours of debate at CDLAC over the tiebreaker, and some of whom may not have missed some of that. do you want to sort of, do you want me to sort of run down a little summary of what some of those pieces may be? Do you want to sort of take a crack at sort of what that tiebreaker is like, just in general, not all the specifics of it, but looks at, or?
You do the best job I've heard, so
I mean,
Mark, I think you should.
Okay. So I just, for the benefit of our audience, I think, because this is, obviously the tiebreaker, everything comes down to the tiebreaker at CDLAC, or, well, not exclusively. We'll come back on that point with respect to higher opportunity area projects. But with respect to tiebreaker, most things come down to the tiebreaker. As we know, for this past year and a half or so, the tiebreaker has been the least amount of bonds and state credits requested per unit, adjusted by bedroom size, but it's essentially a bond efficiency measure only. The new tiebreaker really is looking at public benefit efficiency. So the public benefit is a numerator, and then the amount of bonds and state credits requested as a denominator. So we're really comparing the two. It's not, and the way the committee sort of, after many hours of debate, came down, in summary, I would say the factors that go into that numerator, the public benefit factors are, one, just production of units, right? So there's a production benefit, again, adjusted a bit by bedroom size and whatnot. There is a rent savings benefit. So it will generally be the difference between the fair market rent for the county and the targeted rents that the project will have on each of the units, with some caveats there we can talk about later. And then there are also population benefits for serving various special needs populations, including homeless or veterans, other special needs. There's a higher opportunity area benefit, which includes not just high and highest opportunity, but also some moderate income areas as a lesser benefit, but a benefit. And then a community revitalization benefit. So developments that are in a community revitalization area, and that, where there's a plan in place to sort of do comprehensive investment in that area, can get a benefit as well. So we're trying to do the both and approach of higher opportunity and community revitalization. And then as Nancy mentioned, there's various transit benefits, right? So there's a couple different transit benefits to go on that. And then on the bottom, on the denominator, again, still looking at bonds and state credits requested, again, adjusted by bedroom size, and also adjusted by a somewhat less weighted geographic accounting based on the threshold basis limits. So, and a couple other things like prevailing wage or type 1 and type 3 construction. So trying to, at least to some extent, account for sort of projects that are more expensive, need more bonds, and some of those things are beyond the control of the developer. So I don't know, would you have to add anything to that in terms of a summary? Does that seem to accurately reflect what your committee described?
Very accurate. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then a couple other things that are probably relevant to our discussion here as we talk with our developer partners is that I think most of you know that for the last year and a half, or last year, there's been an extra point, a bonus point, as it were, for developments that are in a high or highest opportunity area. And I think one of the things the committee has discussed is to basically turn that point off once 50% of the bonds have been allocated to high and highest resource area projects. So there would still be a large incentive to do developments in those types of areas, but it would not be quite as exclusive as it is now. And it doesn't come quite the automatic, it leaves plenty of room for other types of developments across the state, regardless of opportunity area. So that was, I think, a very big thing. And then one thing that will also be relevant to our discussion here is that you are continuing the BIPOC pool, correct? So there has been a number of bonds set aside for projects that are led by developers who are, Black, Indigenous, or other people of color. And that is something that I think that you've had a good experience with. Don will talk a little bit more about that, but that's you're planning to continue that for some time being, correct?
Yes, we are. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right, at this point, I think we're going to turn it over and ask questions. We'd like to get some reactions, both from Don and Suni, who are very active in the development sphere, use the CDLAC and TCAC programs all the time. And, obviously everyone in the development community really follows along with TCAC and CDLAC. It is that scoring that really dictates where and how we do development. And so I think what we're really interested in is, how are both the scoring changes that CDLAC has done in the last year, the tiebreaker change that they're considering that we just discussed, how is that affecting your decisions as a developer, both in the projects you're taking on, the types of projects that you may be doing? And then also Don in particular, we mentioned the BIPOC set aside, and we'd love to kind of get some reaction on sort of how that's worked out from a perspective. You work with the Black Developers Forum, you speak with a lot of your colleagues, and we'd like to hear a little bit more feedback on sort of how that's working out and how we might move forward. So Don, I'm going to start with you, and Suni, I'll come back to you. But if you want to start us off, Don, I'd greatly appreciate that.
Thank you, Mark. So glad to be here. Glad to be in a position to speak on behalf of the Black Developers Forum, as well as some of the things going on in our organization. But, let me start off just by saying that, BIPOCs represent less than 1% of the developer community. If I look back over 20 years, just in the Bay Area, there were over 20 Black developers. In 2008, that became less than a handful. And that spoke to a lot of the non-ability to build capacity based on the way some of the systems were in place. And so, for example, our organization has been around for 32 years. And, we spent 20 years of trying to break through to be a developer where we could recognize the full benefit of that. And as we had our heads down, working and looking up, and we kept seeing that progress was getting further and further away. Every time we make progress toward, getting into that area where we could be able to apply for the maximum points and experience, we could not get there based on the count or the years or anything of that nature. And one of the things that affected us and a lot of Black and community-based organizations they don't just do rental housing, they do home ownership, they do economic development, the full scope of community, comprehensive community development. And so that's education, that's linking partnerships, that's collaborating, basically community organizing, all that goes together, providing the will to make a community more viable. And without having being able to accumulate some capacity, those things are diminished. So, one of the deals that we were getting for a long time were that, since we couldn't meet the experience points, and when we brought the deals together, we were getting maybe 10% of the developer fee. And if we're lucky, we'd be able to have an opportunity to participate in the ownership after 15 years after the investor went out. So it was the equitable issues there were quite concerning, and folks having been decimated due to the 2008, and folks working in isolation, we hardly ever got a chance to lift our heads up and then work at what was going on. And so what we did was, at some point, I think things changed. It might have been with the 4% became more competitive, but we knew we were getting further and further pushed away. So to move that boulder just looked like it was never going to happen. And so, what we did was we were able to work with the state and bring in our concerns to the state, particularly to Secretary Ramirez and Fiona Ma, and talked about some of the injustices that were going on. And so with that, we were able to get a pool set aside for BIPOCs. And we were able to go through the total amount of funds. Our deal was the first one that got funded, which was a great hope for everybody. And we knew that there was a way that we should be able to maybe start making a dent into that process. And so we know we're not through with what's needed. We know that the systemic issues continue to run in through operations, but a lot of them we're not aware of until we run into them. And we are consistently going over to make sure that there's pathways and equitable solutions to deal with it. So we're very happy that we made some strides, but knowing that we got a long way to go. And I'll stop there.
Yeah, just on that, Don. So you were successful in getting an award. Congratulations. Was the BIPOC set aside highly oversubscribed? Are you hearing among your fellow colleagues that they're now putting together developments that they might have passed on before, or at least tried to partner with other entities to get the experience points? Are you hearing sort of a renewed interest among your colleagues?
Oh, we're definitely hearing a renewed interest among the colleagues. I mean, because there is a pathway. It's what we really need also is some allies, basically, that will help that process along in partnering with some of the BIPOC community to help them get those experience points to move into the main pool. But no, there's hope there. I think there's a renewed in the faith-based community for using some of their property to be more inclusive into the community, to provide the housing that's needed. And they're looking for community-based organizations to work with. And so I think we exhausted the first pool, and I see no different coming up. I mean, I think at some point we'd have to get into the main pool to really have the significance of it, because in the scope of things, it's still going to take a long time for folks to get the maximum points.
Great. All right, well, we'll come back. I have some more questions for you, Don, as we get going, but Suni, I'm going to turn to you right now. And again, I'd really love to see any feedback you have on the CDLAC regulation changes and how that's affecting you as an affordable housing developer.
Thanks, Mark. Well, good morning, everyone. So nice to be here with you all. And I want to start off by thanking the committee and working groups for all the work they did in helping to figure out this latest permutation. We've been hard at work trying to figure out, okay, what do we do with this? And I think, we heard Nancy lay out the various state priorities and the committee priorities. And I think you clearly worked to get those all factored in, and we're going to do what you want us to do. We're going to do what is being incentivized. So I think you're going to see that developers are going to start chasing the high, or have been chasing the high and highest resource areas to the extent that we can make them work. And that's the big caveat, right? So doing that, you're going to see also clearly location matters. When we look at the three categories that are being incentivized, they have different weights, and location matters a lot. And so you're going to see that the transit points, maxing out those points in the high and highest areas is what will happen. And you'll see, I'm sure, a corresponding increase in land values there, which is something that we'll have to think about. Clearly, larger parcels in those areas will do better because we'll want to increase production, which serves two things. It increases production, but it also gives us some economies of scale. So there's a double benefit there, some tightening up of costs. Geographically, there's been attempts to try and normalize the rent savings, or to offset the rent savings and the costs. I think we'll have to see how that plays out, because you've got countywide, some measures that are consistent throughout the county, but then, as we know, there are pockets within counties. And so where does that drive, acquisition of sites? Where does that drive where people go? And also, I think the choices the developers will start to make about the kind of construction they do there. And then I think that, so a lot of that is being driven by the high and highest piece of it. And I think looking at also at the community revitalization areas and making sure that we're dialed in on what exactly that means is going to be important. So in terms of pipeline, those are sort of the things that we're looking at. Clearly, it's funny, we're talking about, are we getting everything approved in April or May, and how long of a window does that give developers? It helps us in terms of preparing the applications, but as you know, our pipelines have been in the works for quite a bit now. And so for us, really looking at making sure that we can get some of these older projects that we've been working on since before the AFFR consideration came into play is going to be important. So that 50% cap is important, really looking at the community revitalization area to make sure that that is one potential other exit for projects that we've been working on would be really important.
Great. And I think, one of the things that's been really new in the last year is HCD's Home Key program. And we've purchased a whole lot of hotels and motels. We're converting them into affordable housing. That is not going through the tax credit system now, but it is, I think we all expect that those developments at some point in the future, maybe even not very far into the future, will start accessing tax credits and bonds to do a more major rehabilitation and whatnot. Do you, looking sort of out a little bit further, how do you think that will somewhat affect the, sort of demand at CDLAC and yeah, just the CDLAC process? And then Nancy, as a follow-up to you, maybe, is there has CDLAC and TCAC put any thought into sort of that developing demand over the longer term yet? It's a little early to act on it now, but looking into your crystal ball. So Suni first.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. No, it's a major consideration for us when we look at our pipeline. We're HomeKey is infusing $3 billion of soft money into the market, and those projects all require a permanent execution. And a lot of those are envisioned as some sort of a tax credit and or bond execution. They have to be permanent supportive housing. So the way the tiebreaker is written currently, that soft money is really going to skew, I think, what we're looking at in terms of what deals will get funded. So there's a question there. The good news is, you've got 5 years to figure it out. I don't know if that's good or bad. That puts a great strain on the operating subsidy side of making the HomeKey deals work. But good news, I suppose, in terms of the number of times that you have a bite at the apple to get bonds or credits. But I really do think that is something that we're going to want to think about in anticipation of this influx of deals that you're going to start seeing probably end of this year, early next year, and that will continue to grow.
And Nancy, I realize it's very early, but is this something that at least is on your radar screen?
Oh yeah, definitely on the radar screen. It's something that, we realize we're going to have to pivot, with the, with the way the market goes. Mm-hmm.
And as I recall vaguely, I don't have it in front of me, but I think in the definition of new construction, we did allow for sort of projects that had converted from hotels to permanent residential use was still considered new construction for some period of time as they come in for tax credits. Is that correct? Am I remembering that correctly?
That's at Anthony.
Yeah, Anthony, were you nodding on that one?
I believe so. And I know that there was change with new constructions for state tax credits as well on these retro projects. I think there's more parameters. I don't have it specifically in front of me, but as far as new construction, if it's
right,
like an adaptive reuse, is that what you're speaking to?
Right. So, and I think adaptive reuse included things that may have converted, HomeKey conversions for the last couple of years at least. So it seems like a HomeKey conversion that comes in for tax credits would probably fall into the new construction pool rather than the rehab pool where there's more resources available. Correct?
I believe so.
Good. Okay. Well, I have a slew of questions for you all, but also this is the time when I want to open it up to the audience. I've gotten a few already, but I encourage you in the Q&A to sort of ask questions for Nancy, Anthony, and also Suni and Don if you have them. But one of the things I wanted to start out with here was, luckily we have the California Housing Accelerator program this year, which really takes some pressure off the bonds. We were 3-to-1, 3.5-to-1 oversubscribed at CDLAC last year. With the accelerator now taking some of those projects out of the queue. I think this round at CDLAC, we were about 2-to-1 oversubscribed, which is still pretty dramatic, but is at least a lot better than the 3.5-to-1. But in that, we still have a remaining backlog of HCD projects, funds that, ones that have been awarded by other state agencies, and we haven't quite got that alignment down perfectly. Is there any thought on how we kind of finally clear that backlog, get all those HCD projects through the pipeline in some form or fashion?
Yeah, the HCD projects, I mean, we put a lot of thought into that as well. And, they are competing right along with all the other projects, and we really need more accelerator funds.
Good. Well, I know that's one thing that we are advocating for at the state level with our affordable housing partners for this year. And I think we're somewhat optimistic. It was not in the governor's January budget, but we're hoping to see some in the May revise. And then, we've also been working very hard at the federal level on reducing that 50% disc down to 25. As you mentioned, Nancy, that the odds are not super great at the moment, but it is still within the realm of possibility. If that at some point were to pass, and we had, we were down, that 2-to-1 oversubscription got closer to even, do you think that CDLAC or TCAC would be at all interested in increasing the rehabilitation pool amount of bonds? I know that, we've basically focused on new construction the last couple of years, and I think that works for some short period of time, but in the longer term, the rehabs, there are rehabs that are going to need to be done. And right now it's a very difficult thing to do. So any thoughts on, with or without the 25% test, how that might change the rehab pool over time?
Yeah, we're certainly going to have to consider that. And, the great hope is that does pass in Congress. And, I encourage everyone here to, write in, join the cause in helping that pass. We need more capacity, and that's all there is to it. And we need it everywhere. We need it in the rehab as well. So again, we're gonna pivot with the market. We need to see what happens.
Okay. So a couple questions from our audience here. The one has to do with the number of funding rounds. And I know that, traditionally, well, last year we had 3 CDLAC rounds. This year we're having 2. And then the question is, what are the considerations determining how many rounds there are in a given year? And while we know there's 2 this year, what do you expect for 2023 and beyond?
Right. This was just an off year. It was, with everything that was going on with our regulations and our need to get them changed, and the competitiveness, we heard in the industry that everyone was having difficulty. I mean, we've all felt it, right? Permitting slowed down, costs went up, the supply chain was, just not available. And then also there was, human capital, like, people quit working. I mean, it was, I kept wanting to raise my hand and say, where's my COVID extension, but really that's what happened, is we had so much going on that we had to make that very difficult decision to only have 2 rounds. And that was the only way that we would be able to do everything that needed to be done here at the state level, which included, just being able to process applications with, this oversubscription, and also being able to get these regulations in order. It's not what we intend to do again. The normal process is to have 3 rounds, and we, have committed that we will get back to 3 rounds next year.
Great, that's very helpful. We have a question from Sharon Report about sort of supportive housing for people experiencing homelessness. And you mentioned that as a goal for the programs going forward. And I think that Sharon was looking for a little bit more detail on sort of how you see the 2 programs really answering that need for permanent supportive housing.
So, there will be some change to that. We were giving great consideration to 100% homeless affordable housing projects. And the problem we ran into with that was that, we would have projects come in that were 90% homeless and not be able to compete. And we want all of those projects to go through. So we are considering changing the way we're looking at those so that more projects can be completed.
Okay, thank you. I think we have one from Ken Triguero here that I think we chatted about a little bit regarding sort of rehab bonds. And it sounds like, we're trying to increase the amount of resources, and not yet sure when we would be able to open up the rehab pool a little bit more. Is that essentially correct?
So rehab bonds or recycle bonds? Are we?
The bonds in the rehabilitation pool, sorry. So, I mean, we talked a little bit about it. We're probably not going to have the 25% test right away. But it sounds like the focus will remain on new construction for the short term, even though acknowledging that we will have rehab needs coming forward.
Yeah, and although, we're thinking about it and giving it consideration, Yeah, it probably won't happen within this regulation change, to be real.
Yeah. This is a question I was going to ask too, but it's coming up from one of our attendees. Is sort of, what is the defining criteria for a community revitalization area? And as I recall, the current regulations, there's sort of there's two ways one can qualify. One is that you're just in a mapped area. It's like a, you know, a federal choice neighborhood or a disadvantaged community, et cetera. The other way is that, you know, you're part of a local sort of community revitalization plan where there's actually activity going on to execute that plan in a kind of a multi-sector fashion. And I know there's been some discussion about requiring that plan, applying that plan requirement to both, you know, areas that are in these mapped areas or not. And so the idea being that there would always have to be a local plan in place where the activity and investment is occurring to do that plan, that being in a mapped disadvantaged community, for example, by itself would not be sufficient to qualify. Is that something that you're thinking about in the upcoming regulation changes, one way or the other?
Yeah, I'd look to Anthony for that
Yeah,
one.
I think we are looking at that, and I don't think the definition has been finalized as far as what we're, you know, what the final recommendation is going to be. But that is on as a topic that we are trying to keep specific so that everybody knows what, you know, what they need to do to fall into that category.
Okay, so it is likely we may see changes, or at least it's very possible we'll see changes, but look for the publication at the end of April, right?
Yes.
And weigh in. Okay. Hey, Don, I wanted to come back to you on one of the questions. So, you know, in a lot of areas, or when we talk about affirmatively furthering fair housing, we really just think of it in two ways. One is increasing opportunities for people to live in the neighborhood of their choice. We all know that over time, the tax credit projects have been disproportionately not located in the sort of the high and highest opportunity areas. And so we're trying to increase those opportunities for lower income people. But we also think of it as a both and strategy of then investing in the, areas that are undergoing community revitalization, and areas that really need investment. And again, one of the things that the committee has dealt with is this idea of that the bonus point for higher opportunity areas would turn off after 50% of resources of the bonds or go to higher opportunity areas. Do you think that's an appropriate balance? And does that create opportunities for sort of the more community revitalization type developments? And do the community revitalization benefit points in the proposed new tiebreaker? Do you think that gets us to the right balance in some fashion?
Yeah, Mark, I think it's a kind of a balance that folks are looking for. I know the whole idea is that the studies have shown if you take folks out of a low resource area that and put them in a high resource area, that they would benefit and be more able to make a living and have a better quality of life. And I think it's one and. I think that I don't think that we've gone far enough in those policies of how we're really going to recruit folks in the lower resource areas and have them have some form of priority in the higher resource area. I don't know that that's fully baked yet. And if that's not, I'd see it could be hard. We'll see, but it'd be hard to get those folks who actually are in those resource communities. And I really don't think that those lower resource areas that have put together, and you talked about it before a little bit, but a plan that is very comprehensive and collaborative, where you have a number of entities all striving together on a form of initiatives that addresses the array of different inequalities that persist in those lower resource communities. And if that's in place, I think that there should be, a benefit. You should have equal priority with the higher resource areas, because we know that it's going to take more than just moving folks to a high risk area to get the magnitude or the impact that we're really looking to do.
Great, thank you. And you know, one of the other changes I think that you mentioned briefly, Nancy, was that in the homeless set aside at CDLAC, last year there was a priority for 100 projects that were 100% homeless, and it just so turned out that almost all those developments are in the city of Los Angeles, and so the city of Los Angeles did very well in that pool. And this year there's been a move to sort of reduce the priority to, or expand the priority to any development that has at least 49% of homeless units. And I know that was largely a committee decision more than a staff decision, but any thoughts you want to share on kind of the thinking behind that? Was it to make projects in more areas of the state competitive? Was it, were there other thoughts around that decision?
Yeah, it certainly wasn't, you know, just to not have all the projects be in Los Angeles. That part wasn't part of the consideration, but you know, it's difficult to do a 100% homeless project. So we wanted to open it up to those who are doing projects that are not just for homeless, but homeless, veterans, special needs, you know, that kind of a combined project. Those are valuable as well. So, and you're right, it was mostly a committee decision, and it was based on stakeholder feedback that this was something that was needed. So we're bringing that to the committee for an approval.
I also like to add too, I just,
More questions on this. I'm going to come back to it one more time.
Okay.
Yeah, please, Anthony.
oh yeah, just a discussion with CDLAC staff, you know, we looked at the final round for the first, for 2021 last year. And it looks like, you know, you mentioned the city of Los Angeles won most of, you know, they were still, you know, even if we had the lower figure, you know, while some other projects would have been successful, the city of Los Angeles still did have success, maybe slightly down, but, you know, with the competition and with that always being an unknown, we don't know, you know, where these applications are going to be coming in from. You know, I don't, like Nancy said, it's not necessarily an aim to try and keep, you know, we're going to look at the projects as they're the most competitive, and again, you know, allow for other units within those projects that aren't homeless. So
we've talked about this a little bit already, but apparently they're based on the comments in the chat or the questions in the Q&A. Maybe we'll ask it one more time, just to make it sure it's ultimately clear to our audience. But again, the question is sort of, you know, when more bonds will be available for rehabilitation and resyndications. Obviously, there's sort of a pent-up need there. And I think you answered, Nancy, that if the 25% test passes, that you know, that opportunity may be fairly ready. But I think we can all assume for the moment that that's not in the cards, at least as we read them today. Absent the 25% test, do you have any sense of when that might be willing to open up additional bonds for rehabilitation and resyndications? Or is that too early to tell?
I don't have a timing on that. I really don't. I mean, there is opportunity now. It's not like it's not there at all, but to increase it, you know, we're looking for stakeholder feedback. We want to hear what everyone has to say about it, and then we can take that to our committee and have decisions made at that point. But as far as this particular round of regulation, we don't intend to.
And then hopefully that was sufficient. And so we don't know for exactly, but I think there's a good awareness, at least on your part, that that need is out there, and we will continue to figure out how we're going to meet that need at some point. So another question has come up about recycled bonds and whether they're sort of equivalent to other public funds. I know the committee has decided they're going to continue to keep recycled bonds in the CDLAC leverage point category. But is there a sense that, you know, obviously those bonds don't provide the same kind of economic benefit as a direct subsidy. It's basically they accomplish a very small change in the interest rate, and that has really diluted somewhat the leverage point category. But is that something that you think will be debated again at some later point, or do you think that that is something that's fairly set in stone for now?
I believe that piece is set in stone. It's, it's a part of the tiebreaker that was already voted on. And, it's an incentive for those to use that recycle bond program. That program's been out there for over 20 years and has only been utilized within the last couple of years. So, it is important and valuable, and it's an incentive.
So going on down a totally different track, Nancy, the treasurer has appointed you as the executive director essentially of TCAC and CDLAC. And I know that there's been discussion about whether you want to merge the two entities. Can you provide any insight on sort of what the current thinking is within the treasurer's office on sort of the structure of TCAC and CDLAC?
Sure. We're just trying to unify the two organizations right now. As far as an actual merger, that would involve a name change, legislative change. It would involve, combining our accounting, our personnel. And I don't see that in the near future. It's possible. However, the whole point of me being the executive director over both agencies is just to bring them together and unify them, much like what we're doing with HCD and Cal HFA. We just all need to work together, a lot more collaboratively, and just, stop working in silos and work together. And so far, I think it's been working great.
Great. And I know at one point there was discussion about kind of pooling the CDLAC and TCAC staff. So for 4% applications, bond, the tax credit applications, the idea was that instead of having each, a staff person from each entity doing a separate staff report, that they would kind of parcel out all the applications among the combined staff, have one reviewer and one staff report. Is there something that you've been working on at all?
Yeah, that's definitely in the works. It's in the works now. And one of the reasons that we have Ricky Hammett working as the deputy executive director over CDLAC and TCAC is to help with that actual merger. So we won't have two different reviews, one on the bond side and one on the tax side. That'll be reviewed all at once. Not to say that we won't have a second set of eyes on that, just for separation of duties and compliance, internal compliance. But yeah, we plan to have that as soon as we get these regulations and that second round finished. We're going to start implementing that.
Wow, I think that's music to a lot of people's ears, and I hope that frees up some resources for you all too, because obviously the amount of applications you've had has increased significantly over the last couple of years. So I think that's very good news. One of the things that has changed also as we've gone into this competitive environment as CDLAC is, how we deal with supplemental allocation requests, right? So, everyone needs to pass the 50% test. They give themselves a cushion at the front end, but there are huge incentives in the tiebreaker to reduce your bond request as much as possible. So to kind of make that cushion as small as possible. And in these rising cost environments and whatnot, I'm aware that there are some developments that are, coming in and seeking supplemental allocations. Right now, they are, fairly generously given, I would say. And I think there's some, but that again takes bonds away from other projects that are in the queue. And do you think in the coming regulation changes, is that an issue that you're considering changing in terms of how you make supplemental allocations available in a competitive environment?
Yeah, we've been putting a lot of thought into that, and it's a real catch-22 because we also don't want to incentivize developers to come in too low to be more competitive in the first place and then subsequently come and get a supplemental. So we're weighing that. We're trying to put a lot of really good thought into it. If we do continue the supplemental, the one thing I do know that we're going to do is make it easier. We're not going to make it a full application for it, but it probably will remain competitive.
Right. So it may be easier to get, but then also maybe some greater consequences to accepting a supplemental allocation in a competitive environment.
Yeah, that's something that we put some thought into as well. Mhm.
Okay. One of the other things that that the committee has talked about this year is, obviously, at the end of 2021, we ran out of state credits for bond applications, and we'd still awarded bonds to a number of projects, knowing that they had a big gap and expecting many of those bond awards to come back. So there's been some discussion about for next year, it's a kind of an all or nothing approach, right? If you don't get the state credits you need, then you just don't get the bonds and we move to the next development. So that one, just want to think if that's something that's still under consideration. And also number two, might there be some level of gap that you would still allow to exist and give the developers the chance to bridge? Because, I don't know, I'm just saying if it's $500,000, that might be bridgeable. Obviously, if it's 5 or 10 million, that's something that's not going to be very bridgeable. Any thoughts on that topic of how the bond and state credit awards will work when there's sort of a shortage of state credits?
Yeah, so I know there was discussion as far as would a project get a bond allocation if they're not, they wouldn't get state credits. And I know we've had that discussion. We continue to have that discussion. And I know there's also been discussion, which we're weighing in the event that we do permit a project to move forward. How does the project, how do we determine which project gets the state credits? And that is something that we are going to touch on in the TCAC regulation changes. And then also, I think, with TCAC, I know there's a funding order. So we're weighing that option as far as CDLAC, possibly having a funding order, or I think last year we took the regions and kind of did like a scoring, a ranking system without regard to region. And that's how we ultimately awarded the state tax credits at the end of last year. So we're weighing all of those options right now. And obviously we're gonna put out a recommendation and seek public comment, and hopefully that'll assist in the final recommendation that goes to the committee.
And
Right.
one more question. Go ahead, Nancy, please.
Oh, sorry. Ideally, we would get more state tax credits.
Yes.
Of course.
Something we definitely can all agree on. We have one question from our end here about place and service deadlines. And I think we all know there's been a lot of stress in the system in terms of both cost increases and pandemic effects, et cetera, labor shortages. And the question is, can there be relief available for extending place and service deadlines? Now, I know that most of those are federally set and not changeable, but I know that in very limited circumstances, you have credit year exchanges right now and whatnot. And any thought on sort of place and service deadlines? And then separately, I know that there's also been a lot of pressure on the 180-day closing deadlines, and there's been some talk about, having greater flexibility on the pushing or putting projects between the 180 and 194-day deadlines, maybe even creating a third sort of 208-day deadline. Any thoughts on the various deadline issues that we're all facing?
Right, as non-committal as I've been on all the rest of the regulations, because, I certainly can't commit to them when it's a committee decision, and we still need to hear from stakeholders, but that is one where we'll definitely be making a recommendation for at least, something to allow us to change the readiness deadline. And like you said, the placement service is a federal deadline. We, the IRS has given deadline extensions for that due to COVID that we have, also agreed to. But beyond that, we don't have any ability to change that. And we also don't want to go overboard with offering extensions on readiness deadlines, because then you're just going to back up into the, if you keep pushing the readiness out, are you going to be able to place in service on time? So it's a balance that we're looking at, and we will do that if we can. I heard from bond counsel earlier this year that if all the closings are done at the same time, they have a human capital issue. they just can't do it all at once, especially when there are only, the limited number of affordable housing bond issuers. So I also heard that from the lending community yesterday in one of the sessions that I was in. So we're definitely considering having some staggered deadlines there.
Great. And I know the state credits have a statutory 180-day deadline, but maybe with something, I know there's a bill in the legislature on other TCAC CDLAC issues. We might want to look at it there too, it sounds like.
Right. Mhm.
Okay. Hey, I'm going to open it up. I have a couple more questions I see in the chat, but I'm going to open it up to Suni and Don and then the larger community as well. Are there other regulation changes that you all think we should be engaging in that we haven't discussed that would be important to, in your view, making the system more, just improving the system? Suni or Don, anything that you want to opine on? And again, I'll also entertain comments on that regard in the Q&A box.
Thanks, Mark. I think you've hit on a lot of the major ones already. What you'll see is as a development community, having clear road signs is really helpful to us. And so in particular, the questions about the community revitalization area, what does that look like? What does that mean? Let's get that dialed in as much as we can. The question about the state credit awards was one of the things that was on my list of, would love to see some clarity on, and is there going to be a cycling of that? How does that work? Giving us the opportunity to say, yeah, okay, we could bridge that would be great up to a limit. I think that would be very helpful. Question about really understanding home keying, making sure that we don't end up with a big backlog of those deals the way we did with the HCD deals would be really important. And then it's so interesting, this question about the 180 days. We've really been thinking about that in terms of, for us, it's the 180-day dash for everybody, right? It's the 180-day dash. And what you end up with there from a developer perspective is we try and backload all of our design and our construction pre-con work into that period of time. Well, the consequence of that is that it makes it hard to be as thoughtful as we'd like to be on some of this design and the cost piece. And so to the extent we can get a little bit more time there and understanding the constraints that you all have with the place and service deadlines, it would help us design better, more cost-efficient projects.
Yeah, and I think I would like to just add that along the equity front, I think one of the things that we have to realize is that, it's been a long time and coming to be able to start penetrating into this environment and be able to compete, but equal is not good enough in the equity realm of things. So at some point, I think from the BIPOC standpoint, that we'll have to look within the pool to be able to find some ability to play there. And it may not be the conventional way that we see the experience points now based on how long it's going to take folks to get into that area. So I think that's the next level of concern that you'll see we'll bring out for that, because we still want to have an equity. I mean, folks have been in, and we talk about, re-syndication and stuff. That was a big way of a lot of established organizations were able to build their capacity to, when they re-syndicated. That's not available to BIPOC. It's changed now. So we have to figure out how we can make up some of those gaps that put us in a better position with capacity as well as just wherewithal.
Thank you, Don. Last two questions from the audience. If any more come in, we're happy to entertain those, but otherwise we can wrap up with these two and get you all to lunch. But one of the questions has to do with sort of larger projects that often now get phased. And the question is sort of, can we give any detail on how combining projects would help with a tiebreaker score? I know from my recollection of the 9% program, there is a kind of a size factor in the tiebreaker. Larger projects do get a higher tiebreaker, but the issue seems to be not so much the tiebreaker as it is the $2.5 million credit limit on an award, right? That is often the size limiter. And if people are going to do a 9% project, a large project, they often do need to phase it. And on the 4% side, as I recall, there is, I mean, to the extent that larger projects tend to have economies of scale and would require less bonds per unit, they actually would seem to do pretty well under both the current and the coming tiebreaker. And there is no limit then on the, I think did we increase the limit on the amount of bonds that can go to any individual development without a waiver? Is that correct? Am I remembering that correctly, Nancy or Anthony?
I don't believe it's increased. No.
Okay. Okay, but there's no inherent limit on the amount of bonds to a project. At some point, a project does need a waiver, right? If it's over a certain amount.
Right, 75 million, I believe.
Okay. Okay, so it does seem like we have been, in some ways, we are incentivizing larger projects. Is that in your sense? Would you agree with that? Good. All right, getting some nods. All right. And then there's there was a question about how in the coming tiebreaker that differences in development costs across the state are, at least mitigated. And as I recall, there is something called the delta basis adjustment in the CDLAC tiebreaker, right? And it has, you look at the threshold basis limits for what, a two bedroom unit in county X versus the statewide median or average. I don't remember now which, but one of the two. And then that percentage difference is then last year was applied completely to the bond request for the project. This year, but it was capped at a maximum change of 30%. This year, as I recall, what the committee had talked about is not having a cap on that delta basis adjustment, that if for very high cost counties, there could be an adjustment of more than initially 30%, but then the weighting of that was put at 25%. So whatever the adjustment may be, 80%, when you take 25% of that, the final adjustment would be 20%. I don't know if I explained that very clearly. If anyone else wants to take a crack at it, have at it. But as I recall, that's what the committee has been talking about to date. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, Mark, I think you hit it spot on.
Okay.
Now, applying it in the equation, obviously, that's the logistics of the formula. So, but how you explained it seems to cover it.
All right. Well, I think we have covered a wide range of topics today, and hopefully it wasn't putting the TCAC CDLAC staff too much on the spot, but I think you were grand champions here. And Don and Suni, thank you for your contributions and your thoughts. I think, ultimately it comes down to the users of the program and in terms of how these things play out. I'll give one last call for any comments or questions in the Q&A box, but other than that, we will call it a day. So I'll give it about another 30 seconds and then we'll see where we go.
Great. Thank you, Mark. You did a fantastic job as usual, moderating us.
Keeping us all on task. So, all right. Well, I'm not seeing any more questions come in, so we're going to let everyone go to lunch. But again, Nancy and Anthony, thank you so much, not only for all your work, but being with us today. And I know you were over at the conference yesterday, so people get to see you in person too. I know they're very excited about that. And Suni and Don, many, many thank yous for being our commentary today. So we will see you next time. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you,
Have a great conference.
All
Thanks,
right.
Don.
Bye-bye.
Bye.